that needs updated. Alrighty. I think we'll go ahead and get rolling here. Am I on? I can't even quite tell. Sounds like it. Okay, I think I can hear me now. We'll go ahead and get rolling here. I don't know about you, but I don't like that the time changes, but I am never sad when the fall backward hits. That is always pleasant. Well, good morning, everybody. It's good to be here with you. I already see a couple of faces that I have not seen before, especially I think over here on this side. So in case you don't happen to know who I am, you're used to seeing, I guess Troy is the one who's normally teaching this period of time, right? Is that right? So my name's Trevor. I am one of the missionaries supported by the congregation here up in Amory, Mississippi, and I come into town periodically because I just can't get enough of you. And so that's why I'm here. So this morning, we're of course, as I understand, you've been studying the book of Leviticus. Is that right? Yeah, so Troy kind of got the short end of the stick with this. Based on my understanding of what you guys talked about last time in chapter 15 was some less than pleasant subjects, at least as the typical conversation is concerned. Chapter 16, I think there is legitimate argument which could be made to suggest that Leviticus chapter 16 is the central chapter of the book of Leviticus because of the subjects that are being talked about there. And so we're going to do something kind of just to be mindful of the fact that Troy has not gotten this section of the text here. What we're going to do today is we're going to do kind of an overview of what's going on in chapter 16, get some exposure to it, and talk a little bit about it for sure. But we're actually going to jump out of the book of Leviticus for a little bit, kind of do kind of two birds, one stone sort of thing in case Troy wants to come back and spend a lot more time intensely looking at some of the more, we'll say, interesting, maybe some of the more challenging things that are brought up in chapter 16. But certainly we'll talk about them, get a little exposure with it. So we'll look at the book of Hebrews here after a bit. To start, I'd actually like for us to turn back to chapter 1. Leviticus chapter 1. And someone, if you would, I know that I've got the microphone, so you're not going to be quite as loud as I am. I don't usually need a microphone to be very loud. So someone who's got kind of a loud voice, can you read for us chapter 1, verse 1? Okay, that's too quiet.
And the Lord called unto Moses and spake to him out of the tabernacle of the congregation, saying.
All right. Now notice there in verse 1, the Lord called to Moses and spoke to him from the tent of meeting, or the tabernacle as it's better known. God called to Moses from the tent of meeting. No, don't want to over spiritualize anything here, but there is an interesting observation to be made. Where is God calling from? The tabernacle. Yes, certainly God is in heaven, but there is a manifestation of him in some capacity there in the tent of meeting. Now, jump to the book of Numbers real fast, to chapter 1, and listen to this. Then Yahweh, or the Lord, spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai in the tent of meeting, or in the tabernacle, on the first day of the second month in the second year after they had come out of the land of Egypt, saying, going on. The Lord spoke to Moses in the tabernacle. What changed? We've gone from the book of Leviticus, and after the book of Leviticus has concluded, we have the book of Numbers starting with God spoke to Moses from the tent of meeting, from the tabernacle, to now spoke to Moses in the tabernacle. What are we looking at there? What's happened? Moses' location has changed. Whether or not there is something huge going on there, and I think there's argument to be made that something pretty big is happening here, though subtle. It is definitely a useful illustration to depict just what role sin has in the lives of the Israelites, specifically in this context, relative to the holiness of God. The book of Leviticus at large, and what have you talked about so far? What are some of the laws? What are some of the things that God has said as far as the relationship between Him and the Israelites? Let's hear some of this. What are some things you and Troy have talked about? Like, what are some of the laws that you've looked at so far? Okay, talked about leprosy. Did I cut you off, Doug? Okay, so talked about leprosy. What's the deal with leprosy?
If you get it and someone's coming toward you, you have to shout unclean.
Okay.
They have to be exiled from the other people.
Okay, so leprosy, that's don't touch, basically. And there are all sorts of laws that are in place, right, that say make sure that this guy is in this area. If he's got this kind of condition, come back to him in a week and look at him again and declare him clean or unclean, right? But of course, if it gets to the point where he's someone who is unclean, he's got to shout that out. Why is that important? Okay, so it's easy to contract leprosy. A lot of skin conditions were highly contagious, especially during that period in history where they weren't as similarly aware of cleanliness, physical cleanliness, as you and I are. Is God primarily concerned with physical uncleanliness, though? He talks about it, and he does make it is important. But is he primarily, chiefly concerned with the physical cleanliness? No, I say your head shaking no. Tell us why. What do you mean? What is he first concerned with? Spiritual cleanliness. He's first concerned with spiritual cleanliness. What would happen? In fact, let's get into the text now a little bit, and bearing in mind what happens when the unclean thing comes into contact with not just somebody who is clean, but rather God Himself, who is the source of cleanliness or holiness, if you will. Let's start reading here in Leviticus chapter 16. Now, and I'll be reading from the Legacy Standard Bible. It's my preferred version, just so you're aware of that. And in the Old Testament, where you might have the Lord most of the time. Sometimes that's the word Adonai in Hebrew, but other times it is what you might have heard the term Yahweh before. And so whenever you hear Yahweh, that's where the Lord, if you ever see it in all caps, that's what that is. So don't let that throw you off. Now Yahweh spoke to Moses after the death of the two sons of Aaron, when they came near the presence of Yahweh and died. And Yahweh said to Moses, "Tell your brother Aaron that he shall not enter at any time into the holy place inside the veil before the mercy seat which is on the ark, so that he will not die. For I will appear in the cloud over the mercy seat. Aaron shall enter the holy place with this." Let's stop there. Did you catch anything kind of confusing there at first? I know there's some history here. We're going to look at that in a minute. But did you notice the confusing thing about the instructions for Aaron?
He said he shall not enter, and then he said when he enters.
Okay, yeah. So what's going on there? Did God just give some contradictory instruction? No, of course not. So what we've got going on here is instructions on how to come into the holy place. What we are looking at here in Leviticus chapter 16 is something called the Day of Atonement and all of the atoning sacrifices that are associated with it. Atonement and mercy are very closely related theologically. They're not synonyms. They're not the same thing. We'll get into that a little bit as well. But there is about approaching God in the proper setting. And so what God is giving the instructions for here in Leviticus 16 is not just how to let Aaron come in and approach God, but also the reasons for why that would be. Now, let's take another look at let's make some other observations here in the first couple of verses. Many of the sort of transitional phrases that you'll see here in Leviticus, you've probably seen this already, kind of show us that a new section of laws are coming into place. Maybe God's talking about specific sacrifices, or maybe specific ways to treat the sacrifices, or people who have cleanliness issues, or what have you. For example, chapter 17, verse 1, what does it say? And the Lord spoke unto Moses. Okay. How about chapter 15, verse 1? Jumping all over the place here. What's it say there? The Lord spoke to Moses and to Aaron. If you were to go to chapter 14, verse 33, God, the Lord, or Yahweh, further spoke to Moses and to Aaron, saying. You'll find in a couple of places where God instructs Moses to go speak to Aaron. You'll see this a lot. Chapter 16, a little different here. What's different? God spoke to Moses after the death of the two sons of Aaron. What in the world? So we've got this very sudden departure from the pattern of these new sections. And especially here in chapter 16, when we're going to look at what's going on, there's something important here. God instructs Moses to tell Aaron that he shall not enter at any time into the holy place inside the veil. Why? So that what? So that he would not die. What is Aaron's connection with death in this context, namely the death of his two sons? What happened with his two sons?
Strange fire.
They offered strange fire. Back in chapter 10, there was strange fire. Do you remember what strange fire means? No? Unauthorized. I heard someone say it. Something unauthorized. That has an incredible significance for our worship even today. But that's another conversation. You've probably already had it. Unauthorized. It was strange. It was not what God wanted. It might have been basically everything that God wanted plus a little, or basically everything but minus a little, whatever it was. It is not what God wanted, not what He authorized, not what He expected. So what can we trust will happen to Aaron if he does something which is not authorized, namely going into the holy place without whatever's following? He is going to die. God does not really want to kill Aaron, right? So there is that incentive for God to have shared this, but also there is the instruction which comes about. So a number of these things, the placement of the book or the chapter that we're getting into today, the departure from the pattern that we have seen so far as new laws are coming into play, that tells us some things about what we're looking at here and the significance of this particular chapter. So let's start getting into this a little bit more thoroughly. We'll handle it in a couple of big-ish chunks. But I, again, would like to spend some time jumping into the book of Hebrews and seeing how there's very much a parallel between what we're reading today and what applies to us today. So let's pick up again in verse 3. Aaron shall enter the holy place with this, with a bull from the herd for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. You guys have already talked about the differences between sin offerings and burnt offerings. Actually, this is a good point for a disclaimer. I have not been studying the book of Leviticus as intensely as you guys have over the last several weeks. So feel free, if you feel like there's something that needs to be brought up that I've not addressed, some observation, some connection that you've made that I'm just not as prepared as you are, feel free to bring it up like Mike's about to.
I would just like to say that we need to all understand that the God of today is the same God of right here.
Absolutely.
And that if he's that stern there, how will he be today?
God has a very specific set of expectations. And Mike, you're exactly right. The sternness, God does not waste words. He does not mince words. What he says, it's not simply what he wants, but it is informing us what we should be doing. It's actually going to have a strong connection with what we're getting into, both for the sermon today and tonight. Thank you, Mike, for that comment. So, bull is a sin offering, ram for a burnt offering. Verse 4, he shall put on the holy linen tunic, and the linen undergarment shall be next to his body. And he shall be girded with the linen sash, and attired with the linen turban. These are holy garments. Then he shall bathe his body in water, and put them on. So here in verse 4, notice it's saying, the holy linen tunic, the linen undergarment shall be next to his flesh. He shall be guarded with the linen sash. When he says the garments, when you use the word the, not just some, but the, what's that tell you? Something specific, right? What specific garments are we looking at here? The holy garment. So I don't think it's in Leviticus, it's in Exodus. Well, where are you? Notes, there you are. In chapter 28, verses 39 and 42, you'll see some of these specific garments that are supposed to be made, unsurprisingly, in a specific way. And so, again, that's Exodus chapter 28, verses 39 and 42. If you're someone who takes notes in your Bible, or if you're just otherwise taking notes, you may find that useful here to connect to 16, verse 4. He shall take from the congregation, this is verse 5, shall take from the congregation of the sons of Israel 2 male goats for a sin offering, and 1 ram for a burnt offering. Then Aaron shall bring near the bull for the sin offering, which is for himself, that he may make atonement for himself and for his household. All right, another pause here. We'll stop making so many pauses here as we get some subjects nailed down. In this text, we're going to see a bull, a ram, 2 goats, and some incense. What is the purpose of the ram and the bull? What does it say right there in verse 6? Say again? So it's personal for whom? Aaron and his household. The sacrifices that are coming up, which will largely center around the goats, which we'll see, that's for the whole congregation of Israel. Okay, when I say the whole congregation, it's not like how we typically think of it today, using the word congregation. That is, here at Margaret Street, there's this congregation. Up in Amory, there's New Hope. The whole congregation is everybody. It's the whole collective body of the Israelites. We're talking probably millions of people at this point. But we also have now come across this word atonement for the first time in the text. Does anybody else's translation or version have a different word than atonement in verse 6? Apparently not. Okay, cool. Say again?
Purifying and making them right.
Okay, purifying and making right. All right, so the word atonement here, I'm glad you brought up the word purify. The word atonement here is critical to where we're at. In fact, the relationship, I mentioned this earlier, between atonement and mercy, at least as far as the words are concerned in the Hebrew, are pretty closely related. They're not synonymous. They are not the same thing. And atonement is not itself to purify necessarily. The idea of atonement is kind of a collective word that has many parts, which includes purification. It includes forgiveness. It includes the act of being forgiven. It also includes this idea of being at peace. In fact, the English word atonement, there's reason to believe it actually originated out of the book of Acts, translated as there's a point where in the book of Acts, I think it is Peter who is speaking about how to be at peace with one another. And that at peace was at one time translated at one-ment, which is fun. I'm not making this up, okay? I can direct you to the source where I got this information, and it is a credible source, I promise you. Whether or not that's exactly right is hard to say for certain, but historically, at one-ment is that idea in here. Let's just take that for a moment. Who is the one-ment, who is the peace concerned with in this context? Specifically in verse 6, of course. Aaron and I'm hearing a whole lot of things. Okay, so the congregation, we're going to look at that in a minute, but for the bull, that we're looking at the sin offering for the bull at the moment, who does Aaron need to be at peace with? His house, and who, ultimately? Who's the sacrifice being offered to? To God. There we go. That is what atonement is so important to recognize, or why atonement is so important. Because atonement, at least as far as the Bible speaks of it, though it can apply to sort of interhuman relationships, the Bible is chiefly concerned with the atoning sacrifices to God. Why would that be? What would cause somebody to not be at peace with God? Sin, which would cause somebody to be separated from God, which might mean that God needs to call from within the tent to people who are outside of the tent, perhaps. Again, there's some interesting imagery here. So, again, this idea of atonement, it is central to this chapter. It is central to the book. It's really central. It's one of the most important concepts overall, even to us today. So again, atonement. It is this idea of being at peace. It is the idea of forgiveness. It is the recognition of the sin that is now being atoned for. There's a lot at play here. If Aaron is going to be able to present the coming sacrifices, he himself must have his sins atoned for. What role does Aaron have? He's the high priest. And so if he's going to be presenting these sacrifices on behalf of the congregation at large, he first needs to make sure his sins are atoned for. Because if they're not, what's going to happen? He gonna die. All right. Verse 6 again, then Aaron shall bring near the bull for the sin offering, which is for himself, that he may make atonement for himself and for his household. And he shall take 2 goats and present them before Yahweh at the doorway of the tent of meeting, or the tabernacle. And Aaron shall cast lots for the 2 goats, one lot for Yahweh and the other lot for the scapegoat. Then Aaron shall bring near the goat on which the lot for Yahweh fell, and he shall offer it as a sin offering. But the goat on which the lot for the scapegoat fell shall be presented alive before Yahweh to make atonement upon it, to send it out into the wilderness as a scapegoat. We're going to go all the way down to verse 19. Then Aaron shall bring near the bowl of the sin offering, which is for himself, and make atonement for himself and for his household. And he shall slaughter the bull of the sin offering, which is for himself. And he shall take the firepan full of coals of fire from upon the altar before Yahweh, and 2 handfuls of finely ground fragrant incense, and bring it inside the veil. So where's the veil, real quick? Most holy place, all right? So there's the separation there. So he's bringing it inside. And he shall put the incense on the fire before Yahweh, that the cloud of incense may cover the mercy seat that is on the ark of the testimony, so that he will not die. There is this constant notation of this. Moreover, he shall take some of the blood of the bull and sprinkle it with his finger on the mercy seat on the east side. Also in front of the mercy seat he shall sprinkle some of the blood with his finger 7 times. Then he shall slaughter... Well, actually, let's go ahead and stop here at 14. What are some things you noticed? We read a chunk there, a lot of details. What'd you notice? Anything jump out at you? What's the deal with that scapegoat thing? Is that how everybody's version puts it? Probably not. I've seen some head nods. Anybody have anything other than scapegoat there in verse 10? Nobody. Okay. Oh, what you got?
Says, but the goat which has been
All right, Azazel. So, this word Azazel is what I was hoping would come up, and so we're glad to bring that up. The word scapegoat is fine in this sense. There are some who have connected this word with demons, and there's no real good evidence to substantiate that there is a relationship to that. Starting with, I don't know, would God encourage anybody to sacrifice something to a demon? Yeah, probably not. There are some who try to say that. Those people, well, I don't want to speak for them or against them. The idea here is, of course, meant to, as it says, to make atonement upon it. Do you see that? To make atonement upon it. So this goat, in some measure, represents the atonement. So one of the goats is the sacrifice. This is the justice that is necessary to make that atonement possible. Atonement also carries with it the idea of justice being fulfilled. So there's a lot going on. That word atonement, it's got a lot of moving parts. But this goat that has been sent out into the wilderness, it's not just tough luck. Who else has wandered in the wilderness here? Israelites. They will begin their wanderings in the wilderness before too long. There's probably some symbolism going on here. There is death, which is necessary for sin, right? What does Romans 3:23 tell it? 6:23 tell us. The wages of sin is death. Okay, so death is necessary in order for sin to be atoned for. And remember that. Death is necessary in order for sin to be atoned for. You and I are still alive and we have hope of eternal life. Something going on there, right? And then being sent out into the wilderness. So there is this goat is able to be alive because the other goat is dead. And again, there is some symbolism that's happening here. That's the point, part of the point. Anything else jump to your attention that you'd like to comment on before we move on to the next section? Okay, verse 15. Then he, that is Aaron, shall slaughter the goat of the sin offering, which is for the people, and bring its blood inside the veil, and do with its blood as he did with the blood of the bull. And he shall sprinkle it on the mercy seat and in front of the mercy seat. So he shall make atonement for the holy place because of the uncleanness of the sons of Israel, and because of their transgressions in regard to all their sins. And thus he shall do for the tent of meeting, which abides with them within the midst of their uncleanness. Now when he goes in to make atonement in the holy place, no one shall be in the tent of meeting until he comes out, and that he may make atonement for himself and for his household and for all the assembly or all the congregation or everybody who comprises Israel. Then he shall go out to the altar that is before Yahweh and make atonement for it. And he shall take some of the blood of the bull and of the blood of the goat and put it on the horns of the altar on all sides. With his finger he shall sprinkle some of the blood on it 7 times and cleanse it and set it apart as holy from the uncleanness of the sons of Israel. I promise I'm not just trying to zip through this stuff. Every word in here is inspired by God. It's just that there's a lot to get through. And there's a lot of similar details. But there's a really important verse that showed up in there. Look at verse 16 again. So he shall make atonement for the holy place. Why? Because of the sins of whom? The children of Israel. This sacrifice is for all. Now here's the question. If it is the case that there is atonement being made for the sins of Israel, what is necessary to have happened? If God is going to expect sins being cleansed, what must have happened to begin with? Well, so death certainly is part of it. Sin has happened. Leviticus, I got the other L, one of the other L's. Leviticus 16 assumes, God is assuming that there will be sin that the congregation of Israel will need atone for. You know what's really interesting? So that other Romans verse, Romans 3:23. What does it say there?
For all have sinned
For all have sinned
and come short.
and come short of the glory of God. But notice, all have sinned. What's the verb tense there? That's past tense. We're going to look at this a little bit here in a minute. But Hebrews 4:15. Jesus lived as the form of man, endured all of the things that are difficult for a man, has been tempted in every way as we have been, and yet was without sin. Here's something that's very fascinating. And if it makes you feel bad, sorry, it kind of should. It should make us feel bad. The reality is it is possible to live a sinless life. Romans 3:23 does not say, for all will sin. It says all have sinned. Now, of course, practically we can understand that as for all will sin. But we choose not to. And there is all of this assumption that happens from God. He knows that people are going to sin. They are going to do what is wrong. It's not so much that it's unavoidable. It's not so much that it's not hold on. You get a lot of double negatives here. It is not so much that sin is unavoidable. Rather, it is that we will not avoid it.
Paul had to buffet his body daily.
He had, because otherwise he would do what? He would sin. There is so much intentionality that it takes to live a sinless life. Even if you cannot consciously think of some sin that you have lived in your whole life, and I have never met anybody who has been able to say that even, but theoretically, even if there's something you could not think of, you probably missed something. And in fact, that's part of what the atonement, the Day of Atonement is for, are those sins that go unknown. In fact, another thing that God talks about in the book of Leviticus are those sins which somebody commits in ignorance. There are times where people just don't realize what they're doing is wrong. So, there is the assumption that sin has taken place. Much of the rest of the chapter, we're going to zip down now and kind of go past some of these things. If anybody wants to hit back on some of it, we can. I'll leave it for Troy also to go back and check it out. But as we go through much of the rest of this chapter, it's talking more about the actual process of sending the scapegoat out into the wilderness, and there is also the cleaning up that basically has to take place. I don't want to dismiss those, so please do not interpret this paraphrasing, summarizing as diminishing its value. It's just, there's some other very important stuff to talk about here for the sake of time. But do note, what would happen if somebody did not send the goat out properly? Would God be satisfied with that? No. If the cleanup happens, the cleansing which takes place afterwards is supposed to take place afterwards, if that did not happen in the way God prescribed it, would God be pleased with that? No. Okay? So even though we're kind of zipping through this, do not interpret that as me suggesting that it doesn't matter. It very much does. There's just some other very important things I want to make sure we hit on too, because that will help us apply it to ourselves. Quick time out. What time do I need to wrap up?
Bell ring.
And when will that be? 45? Sweet. All right, cool. I thought it was 40 for a second for some reason. I was like, we're running out of time. All right, cool. We can work with this. Jump down to verse 29. And this shall be a perpetual statute for you. In the 7th month, on the 10th day of the month, you shall humble your souls and not do any work, whether the native or the sojourner who sojourns among you. For it is on this day that atonement shall be made for you to cleanse you. You will be clean from all your sins before Yahweh. Whoa. You will be clean of all your sins, provided that everything goes the way it should, right? It happens on the right day of the right month, and all of the events which surround it, right? The bull is brought forth, and the ram, and the 2 goats, and the lots are cast, and the incense is burnt, and all this stuff, provided all of that takes place. What does God declare will be the case in verse 30? You shall be clean from all your sins. Verse 31, it is to be a Sabbath of solemn rest for you, that you may humble your souls. It is a perpetual statute. So the priest who is anointed and ordained to minister as a priest in his father's place shall make atonement. He shall thus put on the linen garments, the holy garments, and make atonement for the holy sanctuary, and he shall make atonement for the tent of meeting and for the altar. He shall also make atonement for the priests and for all the people of the assembly. Now you shall have this as a perpetual statute, to make atonement for the sons of Israel for all their sins once every year. And just as Yahweh had commanded Moses, so he did. From verses 29 through 34, did you notice any words or phrases which popped up frequently? I saw your head shake there, Stephen. Okay, atonement. So the subject of atonement is again reiterated. There is mercy, there is forgiveness, there is justice. All of these things being fulfilled, not one in place of the other, not one forgotten, not one dismissed. All of these things brought together in the subject of atonement. Did you notice anything else pop up a few times?
My version says permanent law.
A permanent law. Okay. A permanent law, a perpetual statute. Okay? God says, verse 34, how frequently? Perpetual statute to make atonement. Once a year, once every year. Perpetual. What does perpetual mean? Continuing, ongoing. This is the expectation that what takes place, in short? The Day of Atonement, right? This is the expectation. A couple of things going on here. First of all, if it is a perpetual statute, if it is an ongoing law, a permanent law, are there any years in the future where the Israelites will be exempt from doing this, justified by God? No, absolutely not. Of course, this is the old law. We're going to get to this in a minute. So that's important. But something we've already talked about a little bit already. Once every year. So you remember how we talked back in verse 16, how that assumes that the host of Israel has sinned. And that's what brought about the need for making atonement and the ability for Aaron to even enter into the holy place to begin with. If this is going to be a perpetual statute, what is God saying is going to happen? Sin will make this necessary. A perpetual statute. Year after year after year, there will be sins that go on. Is the Day of Atonement the only time that sin offerings and burnt offerings are supposed to be brought forth to God? No, sirree. You've already seen that a few times, provided my understanding of this class is correct. I assume you've been working your way through it, and you'll have seen that. There are many things about sacrifices. When someone sins, when someone becomes aware of their sins, you go. You do not pass go, you go. That will be missed. There will be times when things just have not gone the way they should have. But God, in His mercy, makes this Day of Atonement possible. Perpetually is the expectation. It is an ongoing thing that this sacrifice should take place. There's the bell. Now, there's really the bell. Now, did anybody got any quick comments to that before we turn all the way to the book of Hebrews? So, things have changed, right? Jesus came, he fulfilled the law, right? Christianity now is, the congregation of God has now kind of been extended to include not just Jews, but Gentiles, and there's all of that, right? If you want more information on that, read the New Testament. Are there still sins that people commit after they become Christians? Yeah, there was an emphatic yeah. It does happen. Okay? 1 John chapter 1 has a lot to say about the frequency that will take place. Chapter 2 also gets into that a little bit. In fact, he says in chapter 2, verse 1, little children, I'm writing so that none of you sins, but if anyone does sin, we have an advocate with the Father. Let's take a look at that advocate we have with the Father. According to Hebrews, if you look in chapters 4 and 5, there is the establishment that Jesus is now the new high priest. And he has entered into the true tabernacle. In fact, the tabernacle that was on the earth during the days of Moses and them, that was only a shadow of things. The book of Hebrews gets into some really cool stuff. There's a lot about the realm that you and I live in that is just a shadow of the things to come. Very cool stuff. But in chapter 7, look here in verse 23. The former priests, on the one hand, existed in greater numbers because they were prevented by death from continuing. But Jesus, on the other hand, because he continues forever, holds his priesthood permanently. Was Aaron going to be the single high priest for all of the existence of Israel? Did God expect Aaron to be the high priest to perpetually present that offering? No. Why? Because he was going to die. Eventually, even if he never sinned again and never had any reason for God to strike him down, old age was going to catch up with him at some point. Aaron died, and so did his sons, and so did his sons' sons, and so on. Every high priest before Jesus died, and so there needed to be a greater number of them. But look at this. Therefore, he is able also to save those forever, those who draw near to God through him, since he always lives to make intercession for them. That is, he remains alive, and in being alive is able to intercede for us, on behalf of us, for the sins that we have committed. Verse 26, for it was fitting for us to have such a high priest, holy, innocent, undefiled, separated from sinners, and exalted above the heavens, who does not need daily, like those high priests, to offer up sacrifices, first for his own sins and then for the sins of the people, because this he did, what? Once for all, when what? When he offered himself. Jesus' sacrifice for you and I is that Day of Atonement sacrifice that the Israelites had fulfilled and made complete in himself. Jesus is both the sin offering goat, if you will, and the scapegoat. He represents for you and I death paid, that is, debt paid, and forgiveness and mercy. I know we really zipped through Leviticus 16. Please take some time on your own. Like today, between services, or if you've got, please take some time to look at Leviticus chapter 16 in the context of Hebrews, especially chapters, we'll say 4 through 9. Hebrews, the whole book of Hebrews, you can basically read through in, if it took you an hour, that would be a little surprising. Make those connections. It's really wonderful. Thank you so much for your kind attention today. I hope that you walk away from here with a better understanding of chapter 16. If you don't feel that way, make sure you tell Troy, and he'll go over it next week. So, thank you all.